Hello, and welcome back to Health Without the System. I'm Dr. Tim Scott.
And my name is Mia Scott, guys. Welcome back. It has been a hot minute. Let's
Yeah.
catch everybody up.
It was a nice little break. What have we been doing this summer?
What haven't we been doing? We've taken a few vacations. We've just enjoyed life on the farm with the kiddos here. School's about to start back up in a few weeks, so getting back into the groove here. We've also been working on a few things through the pipeline here. Number one being our supplement line. We are very happy about that. Lots of stuff on the back end going through with that, but some of our favorite supplements that we are going to be offering here shortly, geared towards health and wellness, thyroid stuff, and some really cool things.
Yeah, and I think that sort of arose out of just a need, to fill certain gaps.
Yeah.
We're sort of directing people like, oh, try this supplement for this, and then this brand for this, and then this for this, because truthfully, we want to help you find the highest quality, things that are actually work, so you're not pissing your money away, so to speak.
We will never recommend a brand that we wouldn't personally try ourselves. So that's why we have a few that we are launching ourselves. And then, of course, some of the other ones that we just can't do yet, we will absolutely still recommend to our patients because, you guys come first. So.
Yeah, and our audience.
Yeah, absolutely.
What
else we got?
Peptides. So peptides are a service that we've been doing. I'm really interested in peptide therapy. Again, it's kind of like a supplement, maybe a little bit more, I don't know.
It's more of a niche.
Yeah.
It's not, so of course our GLP-1s, those are also peptides, but we have an entirely different group or class of peptides that we use for wellness, recovery, energy, muscle, preservation and building that we have had a hard time finding good quality sources because of course we only want the best of the best. So we have finally found a company that we have really liked, and we're going to be offering some of those other peptides as well.
Yeah, we've been guinea pigging all summer, so
yeah,
working out pretty well.
Yeah.
And preparing for our first ever family Disney cruise. So
that should be fun. We will need all the peptides in the world to go on that cruise. So
yes.
Good deal. But if you guys ever want to book a peptide visit, the link will be in the rixahealth.com. You can have a peptide consult and kind of look at what we have and go over and see if anything might help you.
Exactly. And also just after the first 15 episodes, which we did before the break, we got some feedback from friends and family, some of our listening audience, some things we're going to try to do different, try to do better. We do want to focus a little bit on making sure we're not just spewing information an entire episode and that our personalities and our discussion and our thoughts come through. So that'll be a focus point. And please, if you have any concerns, constructive feedback, go ahead and shoot us an email. If you know us, send us a text. If you can get us on social media, anything, it really helps when we hear from you. So thank you for that.
Yeah. All right, so shall we dive in? Our topic today is about methylation and the methylation cycle and how so critical that is for our body. So have you ever felt like you were just doing all the right things, trying to eat as best as you can, taking the supplements that you think are helping you, getting enough sleep, doing all the things, but you still don't feel like you're living to your full potential, or you still feel fatigued, or things are off, or just kind of feel gross? That could be because you could be a poor methylator, and we will get into what that means.
Yeah, I mean, methylation is one of those processes that a lot of people have never heard of, yet it's sort of running in the background all the time. Controls your body functions at a cellular level. I mean, there's so much that goes on with methylation.
Yeah, and today's episode, we're essentially going to break down what is methylation, why is it important, why does it help you, or what does it help you with for detoxification at a cellular level, hormonal level, energy production. It's responsible for so much of our body, and we're going to kind of get into that. Also, we're going to touch on the MTHFR mutation. If you've heard our podcast in the past, we've kind of dabbled in that because it is also very important to understand that and basically just be able to have your body function to the best of its ability.
Okay, so I have a question for you. Methylation is so important. It's involved in so many processes of our body. And as we'll discuss later, so much of the population doesn't do it efficiently. Why haven't more people heard of this? And I do know that it's becoming more popular and people are talking about it more, but why isn't it mainstream? Why, when you go to your doctor's office, why aren't they testing you for it? Why aren't kids, as part of normal labs growing up? Why don't you ever get a test?
An MTHFR mutation test? Well, unfortunately, I think that a lot of it has to do with if you test for it, I hate to, drop the big pharma word, but there's not a medication that's going to fix a poor methylation cycle. It really results to diet, lifestyle, supporting your genes, lowering your toxic load, and things of that nature. So as we know, if you guys aren't new here, you know that typically big pharma doesn't push things that they can't profit off of. So unfortunately, that's where we're at. And I do think it can absolutely help some patients get tested or not, or just act like you have this gene and do these things that we're talking about to help you feel better. I personally have a story with the MTHFR mutation, which I'll get into later, but I think it can be very beneficial to our patients. But long story short, I don't think it's tested because there's no medication that's going to help your
There's no
MTHFR gene.
profit to be made by
Correct.
a
There's only
large
lifestyle
pharmaceutical company.
and detoxification properties to help.
Sure. So just so we kind of cover the basics and without getting into too much of the science, what is methylation? Very simple. Methylation is adding a small chemical flag, which is called a methyl group, to DNA, to protein, or to a neurotransmitter. And that methyl group can serve as a signal. It can signal to turn a gene on or off, the production of a hormone, stop producing a hormone, maybe a neurotransmitter. So it is basically a signaling molecule that can function various ways. And we mentioned before, and we'll talk about it again, your genes are not your destiny. The choices you make in your life, your ability to methylate, the foods that you eat that affect it, can turn genes on and off.
Yeah, exactly like Tim said. It's a little donor that acts like a tag, and it goes around and it says, I want you to turn off, or you're a dangerous cell. We're turning you off and you're going to get, tossed for detoxification. Like, there's things that methyl group does to signal your body of what to do with the hormones, with your DNA, which is, as you can tell, if something is telling you what to do with your DNA, it is so critically important because it quite literally helps function with everything of your body. Like I said, the hormones, your DNA was just a huge one, and detoxification, neurotransmitters, everything that signals in your body can be controlled by this methyl group if it's doing its job. If it's doing its job, which leads us to the point of, if you're not methylating properly and it's not doing its job, what could happen?
Yeah, and absolutely. I mean, that's where things can go wrong. Cells that shouldn't be turned on are, and we'll kind of get to that. But I think just kind of getting a broader understanding. So what are some of the most important processes that depend on it? I heard you touch on that a little bit, but let's just run through a few of those pathways. So First off, detoxification, you mentioned. One of the things I think of are heavy metals, mercury and lead, for example, and also hormones like estrogen. You want those toxic estrogen byproducts to be excreted in your stool. So you want that methylation process to work there. So detox is one.
Yep, you want your body to be able to recognize these things to help detoxify. And with our patients, really anybody who has the MTHFR gene mutation, you have to understand that first and foremost, or I should take that back, not even if you have the gene, but also if you have that gene that's acting dirty. Meaning that, your body is basically flipped on a bad gene because of your epigenetics, what you're surrounding yourself with. But nonetheless, when you're detoxifying, if you're not doing that properly, you can be at a greater risk for harboring these toxins. If you have this dirty MTHFR gene mutation or a poor methylation cycle, you're going to be at much greater risk for, I can't say it because we're getting censored. Certain things that you inject can cause these inflammatory responses, and you can actually be at greater risk to not be able to detoxify if you're having some of these things happen. So if you've ever heard of an injury due to some of these things, that could absolutely be a reason behind that. If you're not methylating properly, you're not clearing these toxins, they're neurotoxins, now you get into trouble.
Well, you were sort of alluding to jabs, and that's just one thing. I mean, think all medications.
Correct.
If you're somebody who maybe you react very poorly to antibiotics, or you're like, I can't take Benadryl because it makes me wild, or I get a rash every time I do this, there's most likely something involved in your methylation, and you probably have some form of an MTHFR mutation. I mean, almost no doubt about it. I see this a lot in the emergency department where people will have a list of allergies a mile long, things they can't. And I'm almost like, you're not allergic to that. You just can't tolerate it well. And it probably has to do with your methylation.
Yep. And you can't get rid of it. You can't metabolize it. You can't detoxify. So remember, your body is a system. And if it can't work well, it backs up, which then causes all of these issues. But that's one. First and foremost, detoxification, so very important. You obviously have to make sure that those pathways are doing its job. Second would be neurotransmitters.
Yeah. Serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine. These are mood, energy, drive, your catecholamines. I mean, this has to do with so much when you start to think about blood pressure regulation, when you start to think about all the different things that those drive, when you're talking serotonin, dopamine, even norepinephrine. Now I'm also wondering about and thinking about people with maybe ADD, ADHD, depression. That's certainly going to play a role in that. So really a big player in that process. Hormone metabolism. I mean, we talked about estrogen. I think that's a big one. And also just kind of staying in that estrogen topic, when you start thinking about people with fibroids, different hormone-driven cancers, and also people who may have real bad PMS.
Yeah.
That's a place to think.
For sure. All right. Next is that it impacts the hormone metabolism. So without methylation, like Tim talked about before, the estrogen, sometimes these can get backed up in our body. The first and foremost, of course, you go to the absolute most critical, which would be cancer causing, driven by estrogen and things like that. So you have to make sure that when you have these dirty pathways, that you are working on cleaning these up because your body is not going to detoxify even hormones. So also patients if you've had history of bad PMS or fibroids or things of that nature, that could be a good sign that you are, or a big indicator that you're not being able to methylate appropriately, not being able to detoxify some of these very crucial and powerful hormones, and it's causing a buildup or a backup.
Yeah, we talked about DNA repair and epigenetics, so turning good genes on, bad genes off. That's a big portion. But also one of my favorites is energy production. So methylation is closely associated with mitochondrial health and ATP production. For anybody who's interested in that, we're talking the Krebs cycle, probably the thing I feared the most in college in biochemistry. And now it's probably one of the things that I think is the coolest as we've gone through IFM and sort of taken a deeper dive into hormones and energy. But anyway, there's a lot of different points in the production of ATP, which is your body's currency for energy. There's a lot of different points where if you're not having efficient methylation, it can certainly affect that and reduce the efficiency.
Yep. And I just want to touch on that real quick. When Tim said energy, this just reminds me that a lot of our patients, if we swap out their Costco, multivitamin or something like that, and we put them on our methylated vitamin, I always get immediate feedback. I feel so much better. My energy, I have all day energy, and that's where that's where it happens right there. So if you are being able to use these B vitamins in its methylated form, you're allowed to produce ATP like you should. You feel better, you think better, you just recover better, everything. So it really does make a difference in lifestyle.
Yeah. So let's switch gears and let's talk a little bit about what happens when you don't methylate well. And we're going to hit a few different points here. But first off, let's talk about a lab test because, again, people do get labs every year. Our listening audience, when you look at the statistics, tend to be between age 30 and 60 mostly. So a lot of us are getting labs every year. What's a simple test on labs that your doctor could throw on there that could give you an idea of your methylation?
Number one, homocysteine. And I don't remember the cost, but it is ridiculously cheap for our patients.
On ours, I think it's like $15, which is actually a little bit on the higher side.
Is it?
When you, all things considered, because some tests are like $2, but still for $15. And you could test this, honestly, even just once every couple years to see how you're doing.
Right. Because this is a good indicator of how your body is methylating. And typically, rule of thumb, if you have a high homocysteine level, this is like a smoke alarm for your body. It's telling you that you're not methylating properly. It can tell you that you're not detoxifying, that you're not getting rid of or recycling some of these very crucial compounds that you should be getting rid of. So, and then of course, due to that, there's a snowball effect that you can have an increase of cardiovascular risk and things like that, which we'll talk about, but it really does make a difference. But that's the single best, cheapest test to see, could I be, methylating poorly?
Yeah, I agree. We call it the poor man's MTHFR test, right?
Yes.
And that's what I get. So call me a poor man.
Yep.
So, and then before we get to the more broad range of symptoms, there's other subtle cues that might explain it. And, a couple examples we talked about before this as we were going through, like some people might say, I can't tolerate a glass of wine. Like, some people say I have a glass of wine every evening. It helps me relax and feel comfortable. And other people are like, oh my gosh, if I have a glass of wine, I feel awful. I have a headache. I feel like I'm going to throw up.
Yeah.
That's
and there's a lot behind that. Like, number one, obviously we're not, dismissing that alcohol is a pure neurotoxin. So you're going to feel like death anyway for a lot of people or patients, but it can make things worse because remember, if you are not methylating correctly, you're not going to detoxify. And what I just said was alcohol is a poison. So if your body cannot get rid of that, you're going to feel like death because those have to break down. And if they can't break down appropriately, they're chilling in your body.
Yeah. So you get those byproducts, acetaldehyde.
Yeah. A word that we just,
can't pronounce ever. Acetaldehyde.
Yeah.
Yeah. So your body can't break that down as well. If you can't methylate, that will sort of build up and that will give you more of the effects. Some people say I never get hungover. Some people say I'm hungover, praying to the porcelain god after 2 drinks.
Yep.
And another one I already mentioned, so I'm not going to go back to it too much, but medications. If you're somebody who doesn't tolerate meds well in general, that's another sign. But probably the more common things that we talk about with people, first and foremost, would be like mental, emotional, anxiety, fatigue, panic attacks, and depression. I mean, I'll see these patients in the emergency department who, I'm not kidding, I've just looked at the world different since we've started more of this holistic approach. Because from the beginning, I mean, I always ask these questions. Like, I'm going to give you this example. You're a 40-year-old female. You come into the emergency department for abdominal pain today. And I look at your list of medications and I see you're on a proton pump inhibitor, you're probably on a statin, maybe you're a little bit overweight, you're on a proton pump inhibitor, you're on a statin, you're on an SSRI for depression and anxiety, and that might be Zoloft is a common one. And then you have this abdominal pain, you've been in the ER a couple times for it, you get bloating after meals, you have some constipation, some diarrhea, you have an allergy list to 10 different medications, I saw this all the time, and it's just so obvious to me now when I see this kind of stuff.
They're not detoxifying, and they, of course, need some lifestyle change. There's a lot of stuff that you can do to help this. And as we talked about before, your brain and your gut are connected. If you cannot properly do these detoxifying properties, you can have a backup of systems. They talk to each other. Now you have these, systemic effects of anxiety, things that can
Yeah.
be helped with lifestyle.
And even the other point to that, and we've talked about this, and you actually mentioned this on your TikTok account recently, how, traditional Western medicine is kind of built to mask a symptom. So that 35-year-old who's in the ER, this probably started 10 years ago. Maybe they were getting a little bit overweight. They were probably eating too many processed foods, going through
Mhm.
college and that time of your life, you drink too much, you eat fast food. So they probably started getting some leaky gut, and that may have manifested as some anxiety or some ADHD symptoms. So instead of getting to the root cause, they got put on, an SSRI. And a few months later, their diet didn't get better. And now they're having acid reflux as they gain a little bit more weight and continue to eat this way. Well, instead of getting to the root cause, now they get put on a proton pump inhibitor. So it really is sort of these cumulative effects. It didn't
Mhm.
happen overnight. These problems that manifest in your 30s and your 40s were starting in your teens and in your 20s.
Yep.
And so that's one. I mean, we mentioned mental and emotional. Here's another one, physical signs. I mean, my muscles are always weak. I'm not recovering from workouts. I feel tired all the time.
Yes, the sluggish. You just feel like you're sluggish. That's like the biggest word that I can think of when I think of a poor methylation cycle, because once again, your ATP. And if your ATP isn't producing well, then you're just going to feel like, oh, I'm so unmotivated. I just feel so sluggish. And that could be a poor methylation cycle. And a lot of times I also hear patients say, I didn't know how bad I felt until I felt good. And you just live in this like toxic sludge where you constantly feel like this is the norm. I have to push myself out of bed every morning. I have to drink coffee all day long. Those are things to say that's not right. Let's take a step back and see, what are your environment? What's your epigenetics? What are things surrounding that you're eating or doing or putting on you or in you that could be causing these issues?
Yeah, this is probably a good time to stop and take a physical and mental assessment of yourself. Whatever age you are, how do you feel compared to 20 years ago? How do you think you should feel at this age? Compare yourself to others around you who you may consider living a happy and active lifestyle, because I've mentioned this before, and I'm not sure if you're video watching this, you can see what I'm saying here, but imagine that you live at this certain plateau of health, maybe in your 20s and 30s, and then some events happen. Maybe you get hospitalized, maybe you had a couple rounds of antibiotics, maybe you broke a leg, something big, and all of a sudden you went down a step. Imagine taking 2 steps down. Well, you never really recovered fully from that, and you just started to feel what's your new normal at these new steps. So now you're living a little bit lower quality of life. Well, you age a little bit more, some more things happen, your diet hasn't cleaned up, you take another step down, and that feels normal. So, where are you on that ladder? Where are you compared to where you felt the greatest in your life? I think it's good to think about that and say, gosh, I really don't feel like I did 20 years ago. You don't have to feel worse just because you're getting older. I mean, there's
Yeah.
obviously going to be some natural things that happen with aging, but you should not use aging as the reason why you don't have the energy to get out of bed. Your joints hurt all the time. You can't do what you want with your kids or grandkids. So, anyway, we
Yep.
talked about mental and emotional. We talked about physical. We've already kind of beat up the detoxing, hormone imbalances, maybe a little bit
Yeah,
more cycles. Are a big one.
yeah, this is a little bit geared more towards females because of course the hormones. So we are more hormone dominant when it comes to our symptoms and what we feel. So you could have hormonal irregularities, my goodness, like PMS, like we talked about before. The fibroids, infertility issues is another big one that also goes back to the MTHFR mutation, which is a huge topic in itself. So once again, this goes to, if your hormones are not getting broken down properly, you have a disruption in your hormones, your cycles can be off, your mood can be off, everything. You could have either really poor PMS or skip multiple periods or have heavy periods. All of this relates to poor dysfunction with methylation.
And another one that's more exciting for me is cardiovascular risk.
Yeah.
So those elevated homocysteine levels, which can damage blood vessels, raise the risk for heart attack or stroke, in conjunction with other things. I think it's just a good thing to know. We've mentioned that analogy you and I both really like about your cardiovascular risk, sort of thinking of it as a forest, and there's multiple trees in the forest. And what you really want is all these trees to be green. You want your cholesterol tree to be green, your fatty triglycerides to be green, your homocysteine to be green. So an elevated homocysteine level in and of itself isn't burning down the entire forest, but it's just another thing that you can look at along the way.
Yeah, and as we learn, we've grown over time for sure. I remember this was a very long time ago, many years ago, probably 6 or 7 when we got a first homocysteine level on you, and it was elevated.
Yeah,
And
it
we,
was
and
like 15
yeah,
or
and back then we just, I
17.
mean, as we're learning these processes and dealing with patients, you learn as you go with some of these things, and homocysteine was one of them forever ago. And now it's so cheap and a staple to see like, okay, your body is under distress. Let's kind of figure out why or what we can do to support that. And he's on methylated vitamins. He's on a very good regimen. He eats very clean now. His homocysteine level is perfect now.
Yeah.
So it helps. It does make a difference.
We made the tree greener.
Yep.
And then just also kind of the last thought, thinking about poor methylation contributing to different autoimmune triggers and even cognitive decline later in life. So I know we've mentioned dementia being like type 3 diabetes. Methylation is totally involved in that cycle as well. And it's just another thing to think about as you age.
Remember that if this methyl group cannot do the correct tagging and in tag cells for certain destruction or whatever, you can get that cellular destruction where it can start to turn on you. So that's where you can get some of that autoimmune issues as well as leaky gut and everything
Yeah,
else.
and with the dementia, so that, we found these sort of amyloid plaques and neurofibrillary tangles are sort of the buzzwords in medicine. And, if that plaque could get tagged for destruction or, the contents that go into building it, you can reduce that formation. So,
Yep.
All right. So how many people out there don't methylate well?
A lot. So 40 to 60%-ish of the population that has been tested is known to have at least one variant of the MTHFR mutation. There is a few variants. Essentially, it basically tells you how terrible your methylation cycle is versus 1 versus 2, SNPs in your gene mutation. So it kind of just gives you like a snapshot. But I personally have it. Tim has it. We have 2 different variants. He could be like a wild card, so it could play a role, but it also may not be, super damaging, but it's really cool, these tests to see. Now, once again, that is 40 to 60% of the population that has been tested. This entire podcast is also to tell you that you don't have to go out and test it for this to make sure that you have it. You don't. It could be a couple $100 test depending on how many variants that you do. If you want to know, by all means, you can get tested, but also assume that we live in such a toxic sludge, which we will get into, that everybody can use some methylation support and being able to open up those pathways and make sure that your body is functioning well. You don't necessarily have to test, which brings us to our next point. What are you living in or around or putting on your skin or whatever that could be altering this gene expression?
Yeah, we sort of talk about that toxic sludge that we all are exposed to. And I'm always thinking, pesticides, plastics, medications, and topical products, right? So everything that you put on and in your body, pesticides are obviously going to be in a lot of the foods. That's why we try to encourage you to eat organic as much as you can. Plastics, we've said this a million times. There's no reason anymore you need to have plastics in your kitchen. Just get rid of it.
Yep,
Change
it just
to
says
glass.
stop and drop a statistic right here because he was talking about the amyloid plaques in the brain. We are now up to consuming a credit card a week in microplastics. 4 credit cards a month you are consuming with the food, with the environment. We can breathe microplastics. That is how common it is. So you trust me when I tell you that if you're not making a conscious effort to lower your toxic load, you are living in a toxic sludge. And they are finding these microplastics in autopsies after people die in their brain, which obviously is a problem. So this is one of the stressors that we need to reduce our toxic load the best we can. Things that we can control. No, you cannot control the air that we breathe at times. You can with an air doctor that we have in our house and certain purifiers, but walking outside, you cannot control that controllable. So that leaves the rest of it, the microplastics in the bottles and everything else.
And in your food, and same with, you can buy the cleanest, greatest form of fish out there and you're still going to get microplastics in it now. Like, you're not going to escape some of the stuff in the environment. So you just really got to do your best to limit it the best you can.
You have to control what you can absolutely
All of us
control.
can't grow all our own food, raise all our own game, and grow fish in a pond out back. So
although if you've looked at my garden, I
we're
try.
Medications, here's a big one, birth control. I mean, how many women have been on birth control for decades?
I don't even know that statistic, but I bet it's wild.
That's certainly a conversation for an entirely different podcast, but that can be a stressor on your body, right? It's affecting your hormones. It's affecting your natural cycle. All the other medications that you're on, we've already mentioned the list. I'm not going to go through it here. And topicals. So shampoo, conditioner, body soap, detergents, makeup,
lotions, all of that, the parabens, the BPA, everything that you can put in and on your skin. And that's why I'm saying, like, we will have an entire podcast on this. Stay tuned for our next one, which is lowering your toxic load. But you do not even understand how many chemicals that you're either putting on or ingesting or breathing in or surrounding yourself and your family with every single day, because there are I think I just read it, over 80,000 chemicals that are allowed to just kind of be
Exist, yeah.
free
And
wandering.
the average woman has something like 100 chemicals on her face by like lunch or
Yeah.
on their body
On the
because of
body in a day.
makeup,
Yep.
perfume,
And we know,
whatnot,
I mean, they're
deodorant.
doing testing on umbilical cords. Like literally the second this baby is born, they're taking the umbilical cord and testing it, and they're finding close to 150 to 200 chemicals living within that umbilical cord. If that doesn't tell you that we live in a toxic sludge, that, I mean, like I said, since birth, that you have to start somewhere. But it starts at birth of the toxic load.
And another thing to think about is how all of these things also affect your microbiome, which is, of course, going to play into that whole epigenetics factor. And, you know, we have talked about microbiome. I look forward to having more podcast discussions about it because it's so hugely important and so hugely interesting. But what you put on and in your body affects the bacteria in your gut, and the bacteria in your gut affect almost everything about your life. So keep that in mind too. We often say your genes load the gun and the lifestyle pulls the trigger. The gun's going to be loaded. The environment to some extent is going to continue to load the gun, but do your very best not to pull the trigger.
Yep. And follow to our epigenetics episode where it talks about all of that. Your epigenetics, we believe, is far more important for many than your actual genes, because your genes, you cannot alter those. That's what you're given. But your epigenetics is what makes those genes either proper, function great or very poorly. So it all matters.
So as we keep moving along, we were kind of getting into this when I was asking how many people don't methylate well. We were going to get into the variants and we got off track here, but we'll talk about it. So first and foremost, MTHFR, right? Methylene tetrahydrofolate reductase. It's the enzyme that converts folic acid and dietary folates into methylfolate. And methylfolate is the active form of folate that's used for DNA repair, detox, all the things we've talked about. So if your enzyme works, so this MTHFR gene, if the enzyme
there's two different
methylene
enzymes.
tetrahydrofolate reductase, if it's working efficiently, you're going to be, very high reduction, getting the DNA tags, the methylation that you need appropriately. Some people have various levels of non-production, up to 30 to 70%.
Up to 70% if you have multiple of those variants.
Right. So there's multiple variants, but the two that are most commonly discussed and tested for, and for completion's sake, I'll say them, but I never remember them, and I just call them C6 and A1.
Yes.
But C677T and A1298C, I will never in my life remember those, but no. C6 and A1.
No, I don't either until when you actually read a test of a patient, then you can kind of go into that. But those are the main variants that you test for. And then, of course, there's homozygous and then heterozygous, which also plays a dominant versus, the recessive roles and all of that.
Yeah. But I think it's interesting because for the C6 and the A1 mutation is more connected to neurotransmitter production and mental health. So you may be someone like, well, geez, I don't really have a problem taking medications. I can drink a glass of wine, but I have what I believe to be depression, anxiety, ADHD symptoms. That could lean you more towards an A1 variant. And then, of course, the C6 is a stronger impact on actual methylation efficiency and homocysteine levels.
Yeah, so your detoxifying properties and things like that. But if you have both of them, your gene is only function, or your methylation cycle could be only functioning at about 30%, because it was 70% that you're not functioning. So if you have both of those variants, imagine what a pull that will have, which is why I just tell patients and people just assume that you have at least some type of variant, because it is so incredibly common, and then do what you can to make your genes function well.
Yeah. And we'll get to that. We're getting down to that section in a moment. Just further, kind of closing the loop here. We did talk about some of the risks associated with an elevated homocysteine level, including cardiovascular disease and stroke. You also do have some blood clotting risk depending on which variant and which level, as well as vascular inflammation. And we've said this many times. You don't have strokes, you don't have heart attacks, you don't have dementia, you have inflammation at the root of all of that. So anything that can improve and reduce inflammation over the course of a lifetime is beneficial. We talked about the neurological and mental health disorders, depression, anxiety, migraines, cognitive decline, dementia later in life, and of course, pregnancy complications. So that risk for neural tube defects, miscarriages, preeclampsia.
Miscarriages is huge.
And did you want to talk about that?
Yeah,
I mentioned this before in the supplement.
Yeah, I forget what supplement one. Yeah, it was in the supplement one talking about the MTHFR gene mutation and how important it is to have methylated vitamins. And this humbled me years ago. This was probably 5 years ago now, where I found out that I had the MTHFR gene mutation the hard way. I just had my son, and it was 3 months postpartum. I was taking my prenatals religiously, like my OB had told me, and I did a nutrient panel because I just wanted to know what my nutrient was. I didn't even care about the MTHFR gene mutation yet. And so it was like a bundle. So I just did it together, and I honestly didn't even know what all that meant back then. So I got the MTHFR gene mutation done. And then I also simultaneously got a micronutrient panel. I was so critical in folate levels. It was like at the very bottom, and it was red. And I talked to my nutritionist. I said, how is this possible? I've been taking a prenatal for over a year now. I'm doing all the things. This is what my OB said. And she said, go get your bottle and flip it over and read the ingredients, which is what I taught you guys. If it says cyanocobalamin, it's not methylated. You can pretty much throw away everything. It has to be methylcobalamin. And then, of course, you know that majority of it is probably going to be methylated. It's probably a good company. So it wasn't methylated. And she told me, throw it away. This is making your levels worse because this will trick your body, which we will get into on how. But it tricks your body to basically thinking that you're good. You have this synthetic form, which is a version that you cannot use because I have the MTHFR gene mutation. So it's really hard for my body to help convert that. And she told me, she said, this will only make your levels worse because you're going to have synthetic B vitamins. It's going to go to your cell. It's going to kind of chill out there and say, we're good, body.
And then it doesn't get methylated.
Yeah, you can excrete everything else that you're eating naturally. I was eating broccoli and green leafy vegetables and kale shakes and all these things. And sure enough, I was still low. And so I threw that away. And that same day it's actually still a supplement that I literally still use for my patients today. And I got on a methylated vitamin. I did a retest in 3 months, and I went from absolutely critical to the highest of the green on the other side of the spectrum. Blew my mind. Within a year, I went to the OB. I told her about this. We had some pregnancy issues, and she tried to put me on synthetic folic acid. And this was my first time to her appointment after having Lincoln. And she was like, here, have this prescription for folic acid. And I said, I can't take this. It's not methylated. And she looked at me like I was speaking a different language. And I said, I will not absorb that. It'll only make my levels worse. And she said, you go home and do whatever you've been doing, increase your dose or naturally, whatever. And I did so. And within a month, we, got pregnant again. But my story to this is you can't even blame your providers because they don't even know. However, I know that there's probably millions of you out there who have this poor methylation cycle or need some support, and you're out there taking synthetic folic acid from your doctor, and they don't even know that as well. And they tried to do this to one of my family members too, and it just makes me irate because I'm like, you can make things worse. You can make miscarriages worse.
Probably one of the first things I look at if it's a daily vitamin or any supplement that has B vitamins is just for that methyl. If it says methyl, then if it's not a methylated, I'm just putting it right back on the shelf.
Because it's such a cheap synthetic form that's in a pill form. It's like, this costs some cents to make. Like there's not, and your body can't use it.
So let's also, though, you mentioned it, and we'll just kind of go back here. Obviously, we first and foremost want people to increase your levels naturally.
Sure.
Supplements, you don't supplement your way out of good health. So you mentioned some of the foods, your leafy greens. What about, we like eggs, right? We have pasture raised eggs here.
Yeah, those are amazing. High in choline. I love that. That's an amazing neurotransmitter for the kiddos too. They like their eggs. So just doing what you can to use food. Remember, we preach this all the time. Food is medicine or food is poison. Processed stuff that can have a shelf life longer than you, that's going to be not very beneficial, which we'll get into why, because it's synthetic. And, eat the natural sources. So choline's a great one.
Yeah, you want foods that are good methyl donors, like choline. Now, let's say, guys, I'm vegan. I don't want to eat eggs. Well, we mentioned the leafy green, but beets.
Yep, beets
they're
are
high
huge.
in
betaine.
Yeah.
So we're just
another
high in
one.
betaine. And that's another very powerful methyl donor that can help support your methylation cycle as well. So imagine you're, eating dinner, and quite literally, it's funny that I had this last night. You have sliced up beets, you have your broccoli, you can have your spinach, and you just air fry that for whatever, and then you have your protein of choice. You can have an entire bowl to support your methylation cycle and just feel so much better.
And it's delicious.
And it's
really good.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And once you start to use food as medicine, your entire life can quite literally change. So,
and the other cool part is, so we talked about detox and how this supports detox. Well, think if you've got some cruciferous veggies in that bowl, like
broccoli,
Brussels sprouts, that's going to support that as well.
Yeah, especially if you want to do like that anti-cancerous would be like the sulforaphanes. That's going to be your broccoli sprouts or the very small shoots. Those are cheap. They're incredibly cheap if you grow them yourself. You can get a bag on Amazon for organic sprouted or the seeds. You put it in a jar. You can have cents worth for an entire jar versus if you go to the store, I think it's like $7.99 for
a little thing that lasts you a week. I love sprouts. I wish we did it more. It's like a superfood. I don't do that enough.
It's a superfood, that is for sure.
So the cleaner diet, we talked about supporting detox, avoiding processed foods, and at all costs, synthetic folic acid. It hides in a lot of things, but specifically bread products. So check your bread products. You really want to try to get things that don't have added folic acid. Mia mentioned this before. The reason they do it is because it's essentially not even real foods. Everything good has been stripped out of it. You have these, what we call Franken foods, which are the Frankenstein, foods put back together in pieces. Avoid the synthetic folic acid if you can.
And if you have kiddos, be very aware of the cereals. If you're feeding your kids cereal, number one, stop. Go to Whole Foods. But you have to be careful of this because in the bars, in some of the pouches, in your cereals, your grains, it's going to say fortified or synthetic, and it sounds like it's actually doing you a favor when really it's
we're
not.
giving you all these vitamins.
It's like basically this, food went through such a synthetic process in a factory that we have to legally put in nutrients because it's not food.
Because otherwise it's not food.
Correct. Yeah. But be careful because if you cannot detoxify right, these can make things worse. These can make you at much higher risk for everything that we ever mentioned, including these kiddos that aren't performing well in school because you're sending them to school with a bowl of Fruit Loops, which are dyes and glyphosate and fortified nutrients and all these other things that are terrible. But you have to understand, take a step back and think of every single thing that you're doing with your children and your meals and your topicals and all the things. It makes a difference.
One of the things we didn't mention yet either is exercise. Regular strength training and cardio can improve methylation. So
and it can reduce. It can, however, and this is for extreme athletes. You can actually go too far and make that too bad, but this is not your average American.
Exercise, lift some weights, go for a run, go for a walk. Yes, get out there.
Sure.
We're real quickly, we shall recap the supplement strategies. Make sure you have a methylated B vitamin. Another good addition is choline and betaine. We mentioned you can get all of this stuff naturally, eggs and beets, but it can also be supplemented.
Yeah, I'll see if I can link my Full Scripts account in the show notes for the fermented vitamins that we use. That is all methylated. There's men and women's, and that has pretty much all of this panel in general, the choline, the methylation of the B vitamins, which you need. So it really can make a difference. And it's not that expensive compared to some of the things that you're already buying in the store. It's just a really good quality. And we are huge on supplements, but we're never going to give you a supplement that you don't think that you're going to benefit from.
Yeah, and there's also supplement fatigue. I don't want you always taking 30 a day.
Correct.
Magnesium is another one. We mentioned magnesium for everything. Everyone who lives in the Midwest has some mag deficiency. You should be on magnesium. SAMe is another one. If you have, SAMe is one of our body's most efficient methyl donors. It can be supplemented, but you do have to be careful because you can get too much SAMe.
Yes.
So that is something that I definitely recommend cycling. If you've listened to this podcast and you feel like, geez, I really think I have a methylation issue and I'm going to try my diet, my exercise, and some supplementation. First and foremost, this podcast is not medical advice, so please make sure you discuss with a physician. But if you were to choose something like SAMe, make sure you're strictly following the instructions and make sure you take a break from it after a little while.
Yeah, and for females, you might want to know where your hormones are because that can actually help really rid hormones, and you do have to be careful with that one.
Yep.
So
we talked about why the synthetics are a problem, so that's just the other part of supplementing is making sure you're avoiding all the synthetics.
Yeah. And I guess we didn't talk about on how also why. So remember how I said it can bind to those receptors and kind of fool your body to think it's good. Well, not only that, but it can actually harbor too much. And you can have like this folic acid build up in your bloodstream and not being able to excrete it. It's like unmetabolized folic acid. So it really can be a problem if you have this gene mutation or you're not methylating properly and you're consuming a large amount of synthetic vitamins or food or whatever. You can really crazily enough do harm on your body.
Yep. And the synthetic B12 can actually, make a lab test look normal, right? So, like you were saying before, it might be a normal lab test, but you're really actually deficient. So that's another thing to think about.
Yep.
So methylation is like the conductor and your body's orchestra. It's helping make this music sound good. Detox, energy, brain function, hormones. We talked about all these different things. You can dramatically improve it through diet, lifestyle. You can supplement, but you can never supplement your way out of bad health.
Correct.
If you had to pick just one thing today, we had discussed, you would say just swap out.
I would just
change
that's first and foremost. It really truly does start with your mouth and then followed by environment in which you're surrounding yourself with. But very first and foremost, because when I say like just swap out your food, if you guys go to your pantry and you actually flip things over and start to read things, if you have a processed pantry, half of that stuff will be in the garbage because it'll have added Bs and niacin and all these other things that are fortified. And it's just too processed. So first and foremost, if I had to change one thing, look at your supplements. If you're taking a multivitamin every single day, make sure it's methylated. If it's not, throw it away. You're doing yourself a disservice.
Completely agree. And we talked a lot about a toxic lifestyle. We have mentioned that a little bit in the past, but good news for the listening audience. The next podcast we do is actually a pretty cool detox discussion. So tune in next week if you want to hear more about that. If you feel you know someone that could benefit from the things we talk about, please share our podcast with them. And of course, we appreciate our listening audience.
Yeah.
Mia,
And if you, well, I just want
Oh.
to add, if you ever want to get this actually tested, we do lab testing. You can book an appointment as
we
just,
do.
we do have, do lab testing. And you can just book an appointment here at Rixa Health and just do I think it's just a lab visit. I think that's what it's called.
Yes, it's called Just Labs.
Yeah, but you could, I mean, we can do a cardiac metabolic, we could do whatever. But if you wanted just the homocysteine or the MTHFR gene mutation, we can absolutely do those.
Also, real quick, since you mentioned that, there are many different influencers and companies out there that offer MTHFR mutation testing
that.
for like $500,
It's $600.
$600, $700. Please do not pay that for an MTHFR test. You can definitely get it cheaper than that.
Yeah, and I'm not going to call out this person, but he's very big. But I will say that it drives me insane because this one super influencer that is huge on the MTHFR gene mutation, at first, like some of the very first stuff that I listened to, I was like, oh yeah, like some of the stuff he's actually preaching is good. And then he went down the thing saying that this single-handed supplement and methylation and test will fix every single disease process you have. And that is pure false. Like there is so much that goes into that. And then immediately he was checked off. I'm like, nope, this is false advertisement. You're making patients pay thousands. We know a couple that paid thousands of dollars to this person to get a test that we can do for a couple $100 and then put them on a methylated vitamin supplement for $60 or $70 a month.
When you can be paying.
You can pay 30 and nonetheless, I'm like, this is a multivitamin, but then they're treating it like liquid gold. So tread lightly with your influencers. They will throw around verbiage like this will cure your entire life, which like we said, you will, and pardon my French, you will never supplement yourself out of a shitty lifestyle. You will never do that. So this is things that you have to change your environment and your exposures and your toxins, and then you will feel like $1 million. But just be careful with these influencers because you can get into some deep waters missing money out of your pockets.
Absolutely. We went over. So just a reminder, this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not medical advice. It is not a substitute for professional care, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult with your healthcare provider before making any changes to your health routine. Remember, you have the power. Join in next week to get more knowledge. That's what we want to give you is knowledge.
Thanks for listening, guys. Tune in for next week. Maybe my husband won't cut me off next time.
Doubtful.
See you guys. Thanks.